but the tariffs against Canada are minuscule. I mean, you're going to pay more for Crown Royal whiskey and hockey sticks and a few other things, but it could grow to a much greater impact. But the impact is just political right now in terms of the argument with Canada. We'll wait to see what happens later on. But now to the point of the room, uh, Marshall. Check me on this, but it seems to me like in one form or another, ever since the hostages were released, we have used economic pressures of varying degrees for what, 47, 48 years. And the last time that we really slam dunked them, to the extent that we slam dunked anybody, was in 2018 when we really went after them with tougher sanctions. And so the economic sanctions as a tool to bring Iran into the community of nations as a normal peace-seeking nation has not worked. And now we're going to try again to make them work. One of the reasons economic sanctions didn't work in the last go-around, remember the gas prices going up
we're listening to an analysis of the U.S.-Iran-Israel
and how
conflict.
That became such a political mess for that administration, and he used the oil reserves to buffer that, and that was because of the sanctions against Russian oil when the Iranian war started. And the West, including the U.S., didn't really want to fully sanction Russian oil because it would be too hard on the American people to put up with those sanctions. So, what can the U.S. do? There were five things. The other point I wanted to make, a pleasant surprise, a major announcement about a new U.S. initiative was not Truth Social or Trump making a fool out of himself on TV. It was made by a different person. Bennett knows, or Bennett, or whatever his name is, he knows, he understands economics a lot better than anybody else in this room probably. And he was articulate. He handled the questions. I watched the whole thing. He handled the questions from the press. He was calm, and he was not going to reveal the details. But the broad strokes that he did reveal were in a measured, statesman-like manner of speaking, which is refreshing to see coming out of this administration. But the worst thing that I think the U.S. can do is to not allow any nation that deals with Iran to use the U.S. banking system and/or Tiger can correct me on this. What is it called? SWIFT, Tiger, or Gary? The system that is used worldwide to transfer funds all over the world. So I can send money to grandma in China, or a Chinese grandma can send money to her kids here using that system. And to cut a nation off from that system would be, oh my God, the effects that it would have on the financial system with that individual country, and depending upon how large it is, the impact that it would have worldwide on the global economy. Sanctions are not effective when the nation applying them is not willing to sacrifice to some degree the results of imposing those sanctions. Is this bluster? I think we got to go by the track record of the administration. I think it is. I don't think it's intended as bluster, but I don't think it is going to have any noticeable impact over the next year or more in terms of further crushing Iran. it may have some very negative impact on further relations with others and the political and economic backlash against the American people, which is going to drive them even crazier, crazy enough to vote in the Democratic Socialists. So, you know, we thought we were going to have a quick fix with a 5-week war. We were going to bomb them into submission, and here we are, mission creeping into another forever war, and the American military revealing its impotence in maintaining sea control to the extent of keeping the Straits of Hormuz open, and the effects that is having on the global economy. And now we're asking the world, or we're threatening the world with being essentially cut off from any and all U.S. banking systems or U.S. banking services, etc., worldwide. Can you imagine taking a trip to Europe if those things come to fruition? And I don't think the United States has certainly the American people don't, and I don't think the political the administration is willing to suffer the political backlash and stick with the sanctions, giving them enough time to maybe actually have some effect. That was too long, but that's it in a nutshell.
So thank you. SWIFT is a centralized, transparent, and it's a messaging system between banks to facilitate the transferring of funds. But my understanding is that it is legally compliant. So that any attempt by Iran or even Russia to use it to move money would trigger global regulatory red flags. Now, what that exactly means, I don't know. But I'm just saying that because I wanted to get an explanation for people what SWIFT actually is.
Well, what did you just say? It would have some global willingness to enforce the use of SWIFT. That's like drawing another red line. I think that's what you said. And SWIFT is a huge red line. If you do this, we're going to essentially cut off your communication system with the banking systems anywhere in the world. Holy cow. Do we have the guts to do that and stick with it long enough to bring Iran to its knees? And even that, will it bring Iran to its knees? I doubt it. Iran will come to its knees when the people rise up and overthrow their own government.
So recognizing that I have no idea how SWIFT really works, I only know what I've researched. What I'm researching is that that SWIFT is basically impermeable to sanction evasions. But there are ways outside of SWIFT, and you mentioned China. They've developed their own interbanking system, and Russia built their own interbanking system. So, according to my reading, and I went to AI for this, when Russia or Iran trade with China, they send payment messages through the Chinese or Russian systems, bypassing SWIFT and the US dollar altogether because they're using their own currency or Russia's currency or China's currency.
Yeah, that is the threat. The threat is not, you can't cut that cord.
Right, that's what I'm understanding, correct.
But the threat is if a nation does that, then we're going to impose drastic, like SWIFT, sanctions against that nation and cut them out of the U.S. system. Are we really going to do that to China? Or
I don't know, but as you point out, you better be willing to accept the consequences of that when it comes to your own household budget.
If you think $5 a gallon gas is bad, look at the consequences when we basically bring the world economy to its knees. Holy cow. And
Yeah.
I look forward to Tiger's
I am too.
explanation.
I am too.
So let's give it to Tiger.
Thank you, Anson. Tiger followed by El Normo.
Hey, Anson. Grateful for the shout out, and as always, it's very, very good to hear from you. And I did hear a lot of guests, usually on this stage, when they talk about this, there's a lot of emotion involved. But I think what you were highlighting is actually analysis on a strategic and not just tactical level. Because I was actually just about to touch upon this too, without you having to prompt me, because I think this is what's actually important. Every time the United States wields its dominance in global finance as a weapon through sanctions, there's a reason why the United States used to do it very scantily. They don't want to use it very willy-nilly to some extent, because they understand that it's the global acceptance of the US dollar and as the US financial infrastructure. That's what's giving the United States its power as a liquidity creator in global economy. Every time the United States uses sanctions against a foreign nation, we trusted the US dollar by perhaps seizing their assets, preventing them from trading. It's a time not only does damages to that target nation, but it's also a time that damages US credibility as a somewhat neutral actor in global financial stage. We've seen this in the Ukraine war against Russia. And every time when something like this happens, actually there is a greater need for global nations to diversify, to at least diversify from not only US financial institutions, but also US assets. What we're seeing today on Iran, last time, I think a few days ago, I made analysis on why China would not comply with US sanctions on Iran. Because, to summarize that very quickly, it's because China has been sharpening its sword, so to speak, in counter sanctions. And China believes that it could inflict more economic damage on US economy. But China does not wish to be engaging in a trade war or a financial war against the United States, but will not back down from it. So that's the summary from what I said last time. What I touched on last time but didn't have time to expand, and is more relevant today, is that I said that the United States is not in a great position to maintain an economic offensive against China or any other nation at this point, because of, frankly, what we're seeing is the lack of demand for especially long-term US bonds. The US bond market, the 30-year, has hit something like 5.3, 5.2 in yield. That means the people are offering lower prices to buy these bonds so that they drive up the returns. That's the yield, right? When you see a high yield in the bond market, it means low confidence in the prospect of holding onto the long-term US debt. What we're also seeing is, frankly, from the Chinese reading, it feels like a beginning of the end here, because the US has been doing a few things that is very extraordinary. The first thing they did is they are trying to intervene in the long-term bond market by raising short-term debt, right? This is very unusual. The second thing they're trying to do is to collateralize long-term debt by having nations not to sell off the US long-term debt, but use this as a collateral while issuing them new liquidity to finance their own things. Despite this, we're still seeing major countries that hold American debts, including the Chinese, which are the third, the UK, and the Japanese, which are the biggest holders. All of these nations are reducing their holding of US debt. Adding to that, there is also talk of the US re-evaluating the assets that's still stored in gold in the vault controlled by the Treasury Department, and use that as a new collateral to back new American debt. So what these things tell us is that the Americans themselves understand that people's confidence in the U.S. dollar and the U.S. bonds and that, and especially exacerbated by the $40 trillion that everybody knows it's never going to be paid back in the next 3 decades at least. So the U.S. government already knows that the confidence in the financial solvency of the U.S. institutions is already weakening. At this time, if the United States chooses to wield sanctions and things like cutting countries from the SWIFT system as an additional threat, this is, again, just like I said, doing more damage to the long-term belief in the solvency and the viability of holding on to U.S. credit. And I believe this is the biggest damage that could be done to today's United States today. A few years ago, when I came onto this app, I told many Americans who disagree with me that, there are a few pillars of American dominance over the world, right? You have the industrial capacity. This is what propelled the United States into a superpower ever before the WW2. You have the financial dominance, which came to place after, the Bretton Woods signed after the Second World War. You have the military, you have the soft power, and a lot of those pillars are being eroded have already lost its relevance, right? The industrial capacity the United States no longer possesses. The military, we're seeing that in the Hormuz, the United States is no longer able to impose its will against a middle power. We're seeing soft power-wise, America themselves are losing faith in their own institutions, and globally, you're seeing an opinion backlash against this administration of America. Technology-wise, if you pay attention to the global AI and robotics, today it's the conclusion of the Beijing World Robotics Game. 97% of the robotics are produced in China, and I think only one American institute participated in that robotics game. And finally, I think the last pillar that remains strong is the American financial dominance. But again, taking out a lot of that and also weakening the global faith in U.S. financial institutions. And together with the so-called AI bubble, right? Because everybody could see that the AI is not an area the United States will have a monopoly in. And in a lot of related fields, the United States aren't even competing with China today. So it's very hard for the United States to be able to hold on to this if it doesn't use its power judiciously. Adding to that, every time America uses sanctions and financial toolkits to enforce its global will, it's also an opportunity for adversaries like China to push its own financial institution adoption, in especially the developing world, the global south. We've seen this in Africa, and we are seeing that today in the Middle East as well. Yeah, and just to reply to Anson with the SWIFT. The SWIFT is the messaging system, and the United States have a chip system that does the settlement between interbank payments, right? But the messaging system is done with SWIFT. The significance of the SWIFT is that all interbank transactions are visible to everybody on the SWIFT system, which is chaired by a committee who, constitution of that institute states that the president of the committee that oversees SWIFT has to be American. This is, I believe it's set up in Switzerland. So the Chinese alternative to that is what we call the CIPS system. It's a clearing system comparable to CHIPS, but it's open to multiple messaging systems, and it comes with its own messaging system.
Right, we know that, but as I said, we know that the Chinese and the Russians are competing with the SWIFT system. I want to talk about your comment on institutional trust. It is eroding. There's no question about it. I agree with your point there, Tiger. I mean, it's not an opinion. It is a fact that there is international institutional trust in the United States is eroding. But comment that this is the beginning of the end may be, from your perspective, wishful thinking, because um, I've heard this before from the Chinese and from the Russians, then the Soviets. During the Vietnam Watergate era, the uh, trust in the United States institutionally collapsed then as well, eroded tremendously then as well. And also during the Great Depression. Well, wait, let me finish before you respond. Or do you know what you're responding to? I don't think so. The same thing happened during the Great Depression, though. I don't know what adversaries or their representatives to the United States, adversaries of the United States or their representatives, said during the Great Depression about this being the beginning of the end. But I do know that during the Vietnam Watergate era, there was a lot of such rhetoric, and we did successfully rebound. Now, I would note, from my perspective, that restoring confidence today is much more difficult than it was then, because we have this fractured media landscape. And when I say media, I'm not just referring to traditional media, I'm referring to the ever increasing pressures put on us all by social media and its influences. The deep-seated political polarization also makes things difficult. Perhaps the latter can be mitigated in the future. There may be an appetite in the government for what I like to call lately the Fetterman approach to things. Although he may not survive his own primary, but I like his reaching out. I like his approach to things. The media landscape, I don't know for sure, but I don't know whether any of us can foresee that this institutional trust in the United States will never return, as you are suggesting. How do you know that?
I think those are very fair points, Gary, and I wouldn't even disagree with it, because I don't think history is written in stone, especially for the future. Right? I think there are a lot of change that could happen, and America. There might be ways for America to reinvent itself. But I wanted to respond to you with a few points. The first point is that, contrary to many Americans' belief, China does not want a US collapse, because that brings instability to the globally connected economies. So what China actually wants is probably a managed decline of the United States without jolting the world too much, because it's not in the Chinese interest, right? In fact, today, there are two things that are still supporting the global trust in American financial institutions. The first one is basically, let's call it the asset price inflation of financial assets denominated by US dollars. And this is, the US, especially the stock market, has been absorbing the printed US dollars, and that removes liquidity from the money market, actually also maintains the inflation to a reasonable level. And there is no alternative to a US stock market that could absorb so much injected liquidity by the Fed. And because of the asset price inflation, people who have extra money basically have no choice but to reinvest that into US assets, right? That's the first thing that's supporting the US financial institution. The second thing that actually supports it is China's willingness to still accept the United States dollar at current exchange rate in exchange for Chinese production. And China is happy to keep that going on, but managing a slowly declining Americans, not measured by GDP or its financial strength, but mostly by its industrial and technical R&D strength, right? We know that relatively to China, that has been a 20-year or maybe 10-year decline. You could argue it started earlier. You could argue it started at the 2008 financial bubble crisis. Um, the second thing, which is exactly what I'm talking about, Gary, is the difference between today's America and during the Vietnam War. Is the other three pillars of American dominance have been, collapsing. The technology, the industrial, and to some extent, not really, but to some extent, the soft power as well. So this is what's actually making the difference because, from the Chinese point of view, GDP is a number. Really what matters is your productivity overall of your country. And a lot of the productivity is in the industrial output, right? If the United States at the beginning of the 20th century accounted for about 35% of global industrial output, that was what enabled the United States and also its geolocation, enabled the United States to become such a dominant power after the Second World War, or even during the Second World War.
So I'm gonna actually cut you off, and the reason I'm cutting you off is because we're getting way off track, and let's just review how we got here. In fairness to me as a moderator for allowing it, and that is because Axon brought up, and this was absolutely related to the topic, how the SWIFT system works, and I pointed out that the Russians and the Chinese have their alternatives to SWIFT. And now you're expanding way beyond the discussion of today's topic because of that. And I'm going to reel the conversation back in, and I'm going to go to Abby, followed by Norm. Oh, Abby may be on the phone. So we'll go to Norm, followed by Les.
Hey there. Once I hear the term Global South, this mythical entity that is, I don't know what it is, it's third world, it's emerging, it's developing, it's I don't know. That's when I turn off and I know that this is, whatever comes after that is a bunch of baloney. I just want to point out that our allies in Asia, by which I mean Japan, Singapore, and South Korea, and Australia, and the Philippines, they all are dependent on us to protect them against the communism, against the
right. But the issue
racism.
today is not what I unfortunately allowed
Okay.
to.
Okay, well, all right.
The issue today is Iran is claiming
I'm
that our
prepared on
economic
that.
threats are bluster. It's a bluff. It won't have any effect on them. And, anything peripheral such as SWIFT, etc., is permissible, but I want to make it relatable to the top.
Great. So what triggered the massive uprisings on December 28th of 2025, about 7 months ago, maybe 7.5, was the very thing that we are trying to trigger now. And I see there's some Persian people in the room and somebody just, Persian people entering, and I'd like to get confirmation from them. But they were uprising in 32 cities in Iran. I'm saying, from Tehran and Isfahan and Mashhad and Akbar, and on and on and on.
You are right there.
Thank you, brother. And what triggered it? It was what they call the bazaris. I had to study this. This is called the merchant class because they could no longer make a living. And they first financed the revolution, I've only recently learned, because I just tried to understand this part of the world, because soon we're going to be having tea in Tehran together as free people. They financed the revolution, and now they have buyer's regret, and they want out. And the Islamic Revolutionary Genocide Corps is trying to intimidate them politically. So the idea here my New York accent sometimes slips out, is to trigger, again, economic collapse. So we're not waiting for the Islamic Revolutionary Genocide Corps to surrender because they're suicidal. No, we're waiting and hoping and praying to spur the free Iranian people to rise up and kick them out. And that's what these economic measures are. Now, we can have our ambivalence about Trump and his bluster. He's a blustering bloviator, no doubt. I have a little more confidence in Scott Bessent, as I think it was Anson mentioned before. He's a credible actor. And he's released a series of press remarks today about the ways in which we are going to put our foot on the neck of this rogue regime. How long can they go without paying their soldiers? How long can they go without paying their thugs, which is a separate bunch? The soldiers, the IRGC has its own army, which is some sort of corrupt thing. You have I think they're called the Basiji, which they're the ones that hurt people. They're the thugs on the motorcycles in the streets with the clubs and the guns. And how long before the Bazaris have had enough? That's the merchant class. That's like a very historic, you could call them the bourgeoisie perhaps. They're like the mainstream of Iranian society. That's what we're hoping for, Gary. And I don't know if this will work. Remember, it happened spontaneously just 7 months ago. How much repression can this privileged class, the IRGC, exert before the people just say enough is enough? So I welcome your questions, Gary. I don't want to go on and on. I think I've made my main point. I know you have other people.
Al, adding to you what you say, the dollar hit 200,000 toman today.
Is it 200,000, Alan, or is it 2 million? I thought it was in the millions.
No, 200,000.
Okay.
$1 value, it's 120. It was 180,000 before all these sanctions, and now it's hit 200,000.
And that's a
It's the
record,
first time
right? That's a record, Alan, correct?
Sure is a record, yep.
Could we ask our Persian brothers in here who are hungry for freedom, at what point will the Bazaris rise up and kick these, if you forgive me, these bastards, the IRGC, out?
Well, to be honest with you, the same thing happened in 78, Al. The Bazaris support damn Khomeini in Istanbul because he left with nothing, and then 1 year he moved from Istanbul to Turkey with $100 million in his pocket. Now you are right. This is the main artery of living in Iran. The Bazaris handle that, and that's the top businessman in there. That maybe it is the start of it. Hopefully they go up.
What do you think, Gary?
Well, we have to remember it's not that there's no Second Amendment in Iran. So you're fighting guns with sticks and clubs, but I'm not at all aware of what our intelligence community is aware of with regard to what's going on in Iran. And so I'm not qualified to answer your question, to be honest. But I'm just saying, prima facie, that's what I see. Thanks, Norm. Alan, now that we know that you're back, did you want to speak to the issue? And then we'll go to Les.
No, let me listen. They've been doing very great. I'll just follow if something comes like else, I jump in.
Great, appreciate that. And please feel free anytime you want to jump in. Les, followed by Daryl.
Yeah, what Norm said answers your question. Every dictatorship like this has thugs they have to pay off to support them. That's how they get these people to work for them. And if they're not being paid, then there's a chance to have the thing fall apart. So that indeed is a requirement. Now, in terms of the Iranian currency, that's not the only thing Iran has. It has oil. and China needs all the oil that they can pump out. I'm sure they would supply it because they need it, and also because they like the idea of putting America in a bad place or weakened place. One thing about oil is that oil overland is a lot more expensive than it is if you can have it go by sea. People do it by sea because it's a fraction of the cost. You know that, and I think the third point I would make is that China would really like to get us, you know, I should say we need to have the American petrodollar and the American dollar basically being the world's currency. And that's what supports our $40 trillion deficit because everyone needs to have dollars. So yeah, it's a hard, that's all my ideas. And I learned a lot by listening to other people up to now. Thank you.
Well, you know, I view that as a ringing endorsement of what we're doing here. When we learn from one another, that's a good thing. Thank you, Les. We'll go to Daryl, followed by Dave.
Hey, Gary, can you hear me?
Yes. I've never not heard you.
So a couple of quick points. When you were talking about the crypto and the OTC, like OTC with regards to crypto is more like a private person-to-person transaction. They're usually done in large amounts, right? Normally, you're talking like $50,000 to $100,000 amounts. You're not going to see, or you're likely not going to see smaller amounts. You know, there are a bunch of companies that do it. Like Kraken is one of them. There's another famous one, but it's usually more of a private type of transaction. And with regards to Swift, Swift, I worked for the Federal Reserve. We used to process these things, these telexes all day. So, but there are ways around Swift. Like the Federal Reserve itself has a Swift type system called Fedwire, and in Europe, I think they have a system. I think it's called SEPA or something like that. So there are technically ways around Swift, but Swift is the largest messaging transaction. Swift doesn't actually hold money. They just send messages to complete transactions. So to the question of, whether this is bluster, I believe it is bluster. I think, Tiger made some really good points. It's not just China, but you have some of the best economists in the world, saying matter of factly that we are coming to the end of the petrodollar system, which is why you're starting to see so many countries prohibit, for example, prohibit gold trading, right? I think China banned paper gold, which is basically when you're just trading gold, you don't actually intend to ever hold it. That's what I took away from what Tiger was saying. I also don't believe China wants to see, America collapse. But with regards to, sanctions, my question would be, okay, right now, I watched and I listened. They're saying they're going to impose sanctions, right? But what exactly are they? And are we prepared for, this new type of warfare, which is basically economic warfare? Tiger made a good point. China holds, I think, close to $700 billion in U.S. treasuries. That is a very, very strong bargaining position. If someone whose debt you hold is threatening you with economic sanctions. There was good reporting over the weekend that it would seem that the administration actually tried to bribe some of the IRGC, and they just said no. That was the reporting that I read. So
Whose reporting was that? This is the
again,
first I'm hearing that.
two points that were made by a couple of people that came into the room.
Daryl, whose reporting was that? This is the first I've heard.
I saw it on NBC, but then I think I read about it in Forbes. Because who's the guy in the morning with Mika Brzezinski? What's his name?
Joe?
Yeah, Joe. There was I first heard about it because there was a clip.
The former Republican congressman?
Yes. But it was just reporting that there seems to be good reporting that at some point, the administration did reach out to individual members and offer them, from what I'm understanding, $1 million each. And as I understand from the reporting, they said no. I think that if you look at the history of, our relationship with Tehran, I don't know that I would actually think that again, this goes to the question of credibility, right? So would they be, would you trust them if you were? And again, I'm not taking sides before someone gets in their feelings about this, right? I don't feel any way about what I'm saying. I'm just looking at like data and what's happening out there. I don't know that I would trust the American government if I were in that position over there. I'm not. And also it becomes a question of what is survivability, right? Are there levels of survivability that they're willing to accept, even if it means famine? There was one economist who said that if we really wanted to put our put our foot on the neck of the Iranians, you could just start starving people to death. I don't know that that's where we want to be on a global stage, but I do know that it would seem that you have a cornered animal who believes that this is their only chance to survive, and they might just be willing to do whatever it takes to survive, like be damned the consequences of it. And no matter how many, like average everyday Iranians have to suffer for it because like, you're going to kill me anyway, so I might as well fight until my last breath. If that makes sense.
So I looked this up, as I'm sure you knew I would do, right?
Mm-hmm.
So since the death of Khamenei, the United States launched a campaign, and I'm looking at multiple reports here, offering up to $10 million and green cards and relocation to America. Can you imagine that?
It's crazy.
There's room for them because we're deporting Haitians, and so forth, and people to Libya or Liberia. I don't want to mistake the facts here. It's Liberia. Anyway, for actionable intelligence on Iran's new supreme leader and 9 other senior military command officials. So the reporting is accurate, apparently. I mean, what you just said is accurate with regard to the reporting. That's really very interesting.
Well, yeah, it also goes to show how desperate are we that we have to do this. Meaning like, are we actually the ones with our backs against the wall here?
What's really interesting is, if what you said, and I haven't looked into it to this degree, the overture of up to $10 million was largely rejected.
Yeah.
What does that tell you about how ingrained these people are? They don't want to cooperate with the United States, the Revolutionary Guard. It's pretty obvious.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, you got it. Thank you.
That's really very interesting information. And perhaps others were aware of it, but I certainly wasn't until you mentioned it. David, followed by Amir.
Hey, Gary, great room today. Just to piggyback off of all the comments. Yeah, I mean, I may not be a China expert or, military matters, but I have traveled a fair amount. I've been to Asia 12 times. I've had huge discussions. I've broken down Chinese nationals in restaurants and breakfast buffets, and I've talked to them about what's going on in their world. And they're very reticent, but they're a lot less reticent because they know there's not cameras listening to us talk about what's really going on over there. But they refer to President Xi as grandfather. He basically calls all the shots. And I don't want to simplify a great nation like China with anecdotal discussions, but another discussion I had was with a gentleman who did business in Africa, and he was in the gold business. And I sat on a plane next to him to Amsterdam, and he was doing gold business in Ghana. And we were talking about the Chinese and how they flex in Ghana. He says, yeah, they don't even buy the land anymore. They basically lease. So when there's transitions in the political power apparatus, they just bribe and pay that next guy. And then they move in all their experts into the communities, and they don't even hire the locals. So, I don't know how true these discussions are, but there's clearly, an economic agenda that China's flexing and trying to leverage, absent the military side of things. Whether or not
Right, but that's not. Okay, go ahead. You anticipated my question. Go ahead. I apologize.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So, do they have a vested interest in keeping the IRGC afloat? Absolutely. Do we know how much money's flowing into the pockets of these individuals? How they're enriching? I mean, you got to get the buy-in. I mean, I appreciate all the great discussions about the people and the buyer's remorse of backing the revolution in '79. Arguably, our involvement with the Shah kind of set the undertones of some of that we're not willing to maybe own up in this room, possibly. But that's for another discussion. But that said, where's the money coming from? And we talk about, it's gonna. I read reports, Gary.
Oh my God, David! First Daryl, and then you. This is just amazing. You're, and I hate to have to show my own ignorance on these issues, but because you raised it, I'm looking it up right now. CBS News reported that there was an international ring of front companies, which were front companies for the governments, operating across China, India, Russia, and Turkey, which, once again, I wonder how Turkey becomes a NATO nation. Turkey, specifically for bankrolling the IRGC's operations. Whoa! You see what you just did? By asking the question, it caused us to learn something, or at least me to learn something I didn't know. There you go. If there are these global middlemen who are funding the IRGC, now I don't know how that money flows from point A to point B. I'm sure there are others who understand. Maybe Amir does, actually. I'm happy to hear what he has to say about it if he knows. It really speaks to the futility of trying to pay off IRGC people to defect, and perhaps, and I may be projecting here, the futility of this current endeavor.
Well, yeah, I mean that's what I'm alluding to, and that's why Bassett, again, I brought it up in the room, was calling China out directly, saying, you got to get on board with this. And I don't know how much flex that's going to have with President Xi, but China needs a lot of oil, and they're hemmed in by our Navy, they're hemmed in by being surrounded by our allies. We talked about the allyship and the great work our nation did rebuilding after World War II. I mean, the SWIFT system, unfortunately, is leverage, but that's what we had to do to build and grow the worldwide economy in a rules-based order with the WTO and everything else. But what nations don't like, Gary, is our ability to flex that and to sanction countries and their politicians, and I talked to a guy named William Browder who brought forth the Sergei Magnitsky Act here under the Obama administration, which went after these actors in Russia that destabilized his company over there, starved out his lawyer, trying to seek justice for his company, and so this is what America is fighting for. If I were to speak from a nationalistic, pro-nationalistic standpoint, is to bring all these nations as much as we can into the sunlight of doing business. We want to talk about China. We back China. When Nixon and Kissinger made that Faustian bargain back in the 70s to counter the Soviet Union, we unleashed a monster, a Huguenot of an economy that had no interest in joining our worldview, our way of life with regard to a rules-based order. We saw how they had to basically corral 1.2 billion, 4 billion people into a system where, hey, you just don't ask a lot of questions, you're going to get rich with us, we're going to build these factories. Again, I'm not trying to simplify, but we created this Huguenot and we made a deal with them to send jobs over there. And now we're looking at 70 years of what World War II was about, and we're scratching our head and saying, hey, wait a minute here, we're our way of life's under siege here. And I don't agree, Gary. I'm going to also pivot. I don't agree with the way we're muscling Canada, because Canada is a sovereign nation and they have a right to do business the way they want with other countries.
They're certainly not an adversary of the United States.
They're not.
They're culturally so close to us that this is ridiculous. This whole thing is ridiculous.
But let me remind the group of what happened to countries that stood in our way, countries that we ended up co-opting, such as Hawaii, Philippines, my father's homeland of Cuba on some level, before that revolution, Puerto Rico. Canada's got to understand, look, I mean, you were also settled.
I don't think the United States is going to make Canada a territory.
Well, I mean, but my point is, Gary, those other countries didn't think they were ever going to fall into the orbit.
I know, but those other countries are not Canada.
I get that, but Gary, when you intertwine your economy so heavily with ours, and you get a guy like Trump coming along wanting certain things, it's gonna create problems. And I think, and we don't hear a lot coming out of his side of the aisle, calling out his behavior.
Well, they're afraid to. They're afraid to say anything publicly.
But not only that, Gary, we're doing backroom deals with the leaders of Ottawa, or not Ottawa, but Alberta. There's been some backroom deals that have been going on between our State Department and theirs, because they're an oil-rich area of Canada that we'd like to bring into our orbit. So, Gary, going back to the room, talking about with the Dems coming potentially into power in the midterms, all this stuff is eventually, I think, going to come out, and I think we need to really examine. Are these just desperate times requiring desperate measures? Because this is an America that I don't necessarily recognize. The Korea thing was another big rub for me. I live in Los Angeles. We have a massive Koreatown. Props to the Korean Americans that fought with us and came over here and built businesses. I mean, we couldn't have asked for a bigger slap in their face as an ally. And so, anyway, I'm going to land there, Gary. But yeah, thanks for letting me speak.
I think I want to make two observations before I go to Amir, and one of them is the world is always a better place when we try to all get along. Now, I don't want to sound like some guy who got beat up by the cops in Los Angeles here, but it's absolutely true. We all benefit. Well, not the military-industrial complex, but in large measure, the military-industrial complex does okay because of the threat that things might erode. But it's always better to get along. Are there going to be times where one country outmaneuvers another? Yes. Are there going to be times when we are cross-purposed in our view of things? Absolutely. But it doesn't mean that we shouldn't be getting along. And there's no diplomacy anymore, seemingly. The diplomacy seems to be the threats. And the pronouncements on True Social, etc., I don't think that's particularly fruitful in the aggregate. Others can disagree. I'd love to hear other people's points. That's my observation based on today's discussion. And David, are you an aficionado of Monty Python, perchance?
I do know some of his work. I don't know. Sometimes it's funny, sometimes it's not. But yeah.
Well,
yeah.
It doesn't have to be. Doesn't have to be funny. It doesn't have to be funny to make this point. Especially this point is not a funny one. But I think that what we're observing today is almost as if this was a Monty Python script that's being followed. That's exactly what's going on with regard to our foreign policies. And it's like, Monty Python took things to the absurd. It's been noted times before that publications like The Onion are losing their impact because the headlines in the mainstream media are the kind of headlines that used to be in The Onion because they were so absurd, they were funny, but now they're reality. This is something to consider, but if we take a step back and look down upon what's happening to society, a mirror. Thank you.
Hello there, Gary, Scott, Alan, and everybody. Just a quick couple of comments first, Gary. While I was listening to Tiger, with all due respect to you, Tiger, I thought that I was listening to the Iranian foreign ministry spokesman when we were talking about the demise of U.S. and the collapse and so on.
I was thinking that that was coming from Beijing, not from Iran. But
well, no, Iran does exactly the same thing. They go on about how great China is and how immediate collapse of the U.S. is about to happen. Just for the record, R&D strength of U.S. is second to none, and China is just about getting to the top 10 list on this. So in terms of innovation, the main European countries and the US are right at the top. Anyway, putting that to one side, look, 60% of Iran's oil, export is based on oil. Over 60%, in fact. I mean, that's a fact. So of course, Gary, it matters. It matters a lot that they cannot export oil. And the routes, or as we say, the routes that you mentioned, is not really going to compensate. The oil that's being carried out of the Persian Gulf is by what they call VLCCs and ULCCs. These are very large crude carriers or containers, either one of the two, and ultra large. And these carry 2 million barrels and 3.5 million barrels of oil at a time. You cannot possibly transfer that via train lines or over Silk Road using trucks and that. That's just impossible. So this is going to hurt them enormously, and this matters enormously. Anybody who's going to tell you differently, and the route that you mentioned to in Caspian Sea, where are they going to sell these oil to? They're going to sell it to Azerbaijan or Russia? Is that selling ice to the Eskimos? That's just not a solution. No, I'm afraid these sanctions are going to hurt Iran enormously. And the point is, before this latest announcement, the sanctions were actually against individuals and companies. The sanctions had never, ever been. I mean, this is now a blockade against the country. The entire country is now sanctioned economically. And, Scott Bessent, Secretary of Treasury, I mean, when he announced it, he correctly referred to it as the single greatest financial offensive ever. And this is how it's going to be.
Well, let me just say that to that point, and Anson alluded to it as well earlier because he gave great deference to Scott Bessent. He is actually the main architect of these sanctions. This is whether you agree with the strategy or not. This is how governments work. The President of the United States sets forth a general policy, and then he surrounds himself with people who are experts in their fields, who then use the general tone of the administration to promulgate regulations or policies or actions that are supportive of what the president says he desires. This is who we elected, and we elected him because he promised to do this, whatever it happens to be. And then he's supposed to hire people who will carry out what the electorate put into office in the Oval Office. All too often, we have seen the president, and he has said this is not my bias, I don't think, tell us and do based on what he tells us. He said that he's the smartest guy in the room. He makes the decisions, and these decisions don't necessarily follow the recommendations of the people who we entrust to implement his policies. This is most notable, in my opinion, when it comes to the Pentagon. In this case, we are seeing that the guy he put in place, who is, again, whether you agree with the strategy or not, one can't make the same arguments that one makes against the defense secretary. When it comes to the Treasury secretary, he is in a field that he's well versed in and qualified for the position.
Yeah, I mean, 100%.
So here we have this economic D-Day, also called Operation Economic Outcast, which, hey, if that title is reflective of the success, it's going to be a success. That's a great title. To your point, previous sanctions targeted Iran's internal economic structure. This strategy is designed, as I understand it, to maximize external pressures, targeting third-party entities around the globe. Now, whether, again, it's a good strategy or not, I'm not making an argument, but I would have to agree with the captain, and that is, this is the way administrations are supposed to operate.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I think Trump's penny has dropped that even though he may be very clever, but he's obviously being outperformed on a number of issues which he thought is going to be resolved very easily.
Well, especially his relationships with dictators.
Yeah.
He's been outperformed by Putin, he's been outperformed by Xi, he's been outperformed for sure by the Rocket Man.
Right.
That I have to agree with what David Garcia said. That's really disgusting. That at a time that we went into military maneuvers, now I'm the one taking us a little off topic, but we're making these pronouncements about North Korea, that the Rocket Man is so great. Now, stand down on your intended military maneuvers, make them more passive, I guess. I mean, what the hell is going on here? This really disturbs me. But in this case, it seems to me that it was not the president relying on his intuition, which sometimes is spot on, but oftentimes is not.
Yeah, well, I mean, he's doing the right thing at the moment to leave it to Scott Bessent to sort of come up with a new architecture and a new strategy. But the point that I made regarding the sanctions, yes, I mean, putting aside the third-party sanctions you mentioned, the sanctions on Iran were actually on individuals and the companies. That was the point I was making. And now the blockade is against the entire country. So obviously it's going to have a massive effect. Now, inflation, for example, it was around 30% before the war. Now it's close to 90%. So it could potentially become runaway inflation very quickly. It's very unstable now, basically. So the regime is also running out of money. I mean, some people are saying they're running out of paper to print money. I mean, that's how bad things are. Now, I mean, people can't get basic food. I think Alan has mentioned this before, let alone, pay for rent or clothes or etc. And that's why I think Scott Bessent was basically, he was actually telling the military personnel in Iran, he was telling them that soon enough, the regime is not going to be able to pay you. He was warning them ahead, which I found it quite interesting. And that's why I think the point in this latest announcement is, I think Norma mentioned this, is really to maximize the pressure on not just on the people, but also on the bazaar. And which is likely to, honestly, result in popular uprising. It's not just because of this intense economic pressure, but also because the underlying anger due to the events that took place in December, the entire dissatisfaction with the regime. I mean, it's like a what do you call it? It's like a petrol that is waiting for a smallest, so the tiniest spark to blow away. And I think that I honestly think that this particular economic package, this is going to turn things in a big way internally. And I think that is where the strategy is, at least until the midterm, especially if the oil prices can be managed until then. I think that is a strategy that they're taking on. And I think Trump has sort of given the free hand to Scott to do that. Just a couple of quick points regarding the question that Norma had regarding, Alan said 200,000, 2 months. I think 2 months is correct, but in actual fact, the basic currency in Iran is riyal. And based on riyal is 2 million riyal.
Right, that explains the confusion. That explains the confusion, yeah.
Yeah, so that was the confusion there. And with regard to the Grand Bazaar, which Norma mentioned, the Grand Bazaar of Tehran, I don't know if Alan has been there. I'm sure he probably has. It's actually, I looked it up very quickly. It comprises of 60,000 business units. It's Iran's largest.
60,000?
60,000 business units.
Yes, I want this nonsense to end. I want this regime to fall for the sole purpose of taking Alan up on his promise to take me on, he didn't promise to pay for it, but to take me on a trip to Iran. I would love to see that. That's just, oh my God, that's amazing.
Well, you better get ready to walk 10 kilometers, Gary, because it is the largest and it's the most influential. It's in terms of commercial, economic, even in terms of cultural. The daily footfall here is 1.5 million people. The area is over 100 hectares. So it's a massive place, absolutely massive place. And I tell you, the bazaar played a major role in the 1905 constitutional revolution, as well as the 1978 Islamic revolution. Now imagine this blockade, it will definitely upset the bazaar. I mean, the bazaar
Norm, you're saying that Norm actually knew what he was talking about today.
He was 100% knew what he's talking about. Yeah, he often does know what he doesn't get the credit, but he often knows exactly what he's talking about. And the bazaar was already upset because of the previous economic pressures. With this blockade, the bazaar is not going to be quiet. And as I said, it is extremely influential. And I'll leave it there. And thanks, Gary, for that.
I want to go there so bad now. See, now I got a Jones to go there. So I want to go back to what you said earlier about Besant. And you're absolutely right. He after making the 1 o'clock announcement, he went on several interviews, including at CNN, where he said that the strategy is to curtail Iran's ability to, quote, project power through their proxies. And, by the way, I want to repeat that part. Project power through their proxies. That translates into exporting terrorism. Somebody said the chief export is oil. Well, maybe it's the chief and terrorism is a close second. Let's not forget what this regime is and what it does. And if you allow me to break away from the topic just a little bit, I would like to remind us all that October 7th was an exportation of Iranian terrorism on Israel. And Israel's been paying the price in the court of public opinion ever since, after what Iran did to them. Stop and think about that a little bit. But at any rate, to your point, Amir, he went on to say, and damaging, I'm quoting this from CNN right now, quote, its ability to pay the Iranian military. Boom, there you go. So I don't know whether this strategy will be effective, but I would say, based on what the Treasury Secretary said today, I certainly hope, Amir, that it is.
Make a little comment about what was said on the Iranian news media today. They said, the spokesperson, newsreader said, the south of Iran sacrifice the south of Iran for south of Lebanon. And this created a massive uproar, which is going on the social medias in Iran now. That how dare you want to sacrifice 11 million people, and the people have now got the figures out completely. 4 shires, 11 million people, for the sake of 400,000 people, which are basically the Hezbollah and the Shias in southern Lebanon. So
because they're obsessed with Israel. They're obsessed with Israel. And so many people in the United States now are obsessed with Israel because of the nonsense on social media. Obsessed with Israel. You know, I don't want to get onto that topic, even though I always default to it, no matter what we're discussing. It's my prerogative, I guess, and it's my passion. But I forget, it was, somebody here will know, 1983, when Bob Dylan wrote the song Bully, talking about Israel being the bully, and it was a sarcastic song, and it went on and on and on and on, and explained how all of this rhetoric, this predates October 7th, obviously, it predates all this social media nonsense, how it's all nonsense. And, you know, he's like the poet laureate of the United States unofficially, Bob Dylan is, and it's, you know, it's not something that's played on the radio, but it is a song worth listening to. I think it's called The Bully. I'll look up the name before we're through here, Amir.
I was just going to end by saying that in history of Middle East will be written from, before October 7th and after October 7th. It was massive. It was a massive change, game changer, to be honest with you. And the face of Middle East is going to change because of it.
Amir, I appreciate your contribution because you always have the information that we need when it comes to Iran. You sure have your finger on the pulse. It's not called The Bully, it's called Neighborhood Bully. And the The song is available, I presume, on YouTube, and the lyrics are available as well. Go to Genius Lyrics and you'll find it, or Unfold Dylan and you'll find it. It's fantastic. Thank you, Amir. I just reminded of it. Ali's Reza.
Yes, sir. Hello. Thanks
Hi.
for having me. Hi. Thanks for having me. I just want to emphasize that I do agree with the notion that the putting pressure economically on the regime is the best, I would call, tactical move. It doesn't cost the United States much, and absolutely it will deprive the regime from necessary funds to carry on. But what I would refrain from calling it as a strategic move, because I honestly do not understand what's the end goal. Like, I think this is where a president has to come forward and he has to explain what the end goal is. So that we can judge if this economic pressure would absolutely bring the change everybody expects. To be honest with you, I do not expect although I do support the sanctions, the more the merrier, I don't believe it's going to change the situation.
I'm going to interrupt you just for a second to answer your question, because he did explicitly state the end goal, and he said that it was to completely bankrupt and isolate the Iranian regime until Tehran is forced to choose between total financial ruin and a comprehensive new agreement with the Trump administration. Now, you might take that a step further and say, well, what would that agreement entail? And in that, the details are always where the damnation is, right?
Yeah, what I'm trying to put forward is this proposition. I believe the regime would rather see the whole country go bankrupt. People will starve to death rather than sitting down and getting into comprehensive agreement or total surrender, whatever the president wants to call it. I mean, I will remind you, look at the nature of this regime is very much similar to the Nazi regime in Germany in World War II. This is a theocracy, still, quite has a characteristic of a fascist regime. And they oversaw the complete destruction of Germany. They oversaw the complete bankruptcy of the country, and they also inflicted damages on all other neighbors. And no matter carpet bombing of Dresden, of Aachen, none of that made them change their mind. The only thing that changed their mind, if they ever did, was American and Russian troops getting into the German soil. That's how it ended. So the question is there any historical precedence that we can say, okay, we're going to have this economic D-Day, and I think that D-Day kind of tries to refer to that event, would bring out the change. Essentially, the Iranian regime would say, you know what? For example, Khamenei, the junior, would say, you know what? You killed my father, you killed my sister, you killed my wife, you killed my brother-in-law, you killed my nephew, you killed my family, and then still I'm going to sit down with you and surrender and give you the nuclear dust or give up on my ballistic missile program. I highly doubt it. This guy has nothing to lose.
You're right that there was a lot of blood spilled in taking down the Nazis. I am not an historian, and I don't know whether any of the previous attempts by nations to use economic strategies like blockades and sanctions have successfully forced nations to surrender. But I do know that they never work alone. They only work when there is overwhelming military dominance, and that speaks to your point. There really isn't overwhelming military dominance.
That's exactly my point. That's exactly.
Yeah, I got you then.
I'm saying for as long as the regime believes it has the Strait of Hormuz in hand, for as long as they believe, and look, the secretary might say, hey, Iranian troops, you're not going to be paid. Guys, during the height of the war, the American and Israeli Air Force, God bless them, they were essentially blowing up missile launcher after missile launcher. At some point, there was a 50% success rate. Anybody who was bringing a missile launcher would essentially be blown up. And they still were getting into the missile launcher to launch missiles, meaning the regime soldiers were not just driven by payments. It is very hard to imagine just economic sanctions, would make these guys feel sorry for their people. They're not. They just killed 40,000
No, I don't think anybody's going to make them feel sorry for their people. That's for sure. That we know, because as we pointed out in the beginning of the discussion, they're not standing for election, so why would they care whether people starve or die? It's no skin off of their teeth. It only matters when they have skin in the game, which is why, I don't understand why what I call the whack-a-mole strategy of the Israelis was stopped by the Americans. That put skin in the game in Tehran, and they're no longer, in that position, or there's at least a lull where they're not in that position. Thank you, Eli Reza. That was good. Moran, you're up.
Okay, hi Gary. Hello everyone. I just got into the room a little late, but I heard a few guys talk before me. And I just give my thoughts on what's happening here. I don't know what was said in the room. My apologies if I'm repeating anyone.
Well, you know what? You're not the only one that just came into the room. So maybe there's some people who haven't heard some of the things that you may inadvertently repeat. And so feel free.
Okay, thank you, Gary. Okay, what I really think is happening, it's a holding pattern. What the Trump administration is trying to do is, because truly they had two bad choices. Either they had to go and do more kinetics and go after infrastructure, which would potentially turn the Iranian people against what's happening, and it would not be to the benefit of anybody. And the other one was just walk away and let them have Strait of Hormuz, which didn't really matter that much to U.S., but would look really bad for Trump and Republicans in the coming election. So he couldn't go any of those two paths. He picked up some holding pattern, because what's happening right now is you increase the sanctions and you're putting more pressure on the regime. If you hit infrastructure right away, it causes a lot of damage to the Iranian life immediately, instantly. Once you lose electricity, once you hit power stations, you lose electricity, you lose drinking water. A city of metropolis of Tehran with 13, 14 million people instantly would be without water and electricity, and soon that means gas stations don't work, so they can't pump gas into the car. We could even have starvation. So that he didn't go that way. But once you go towards sanctions, it's a slow death. You put pressure slowly, and as we have seen in the past, once you put pressure slowly on any regime, the public blames the government. So that's the strategy. You put pressure slowly, turn the anger of the population against the regime, and let them suffer slowly so they would not turn back against you. That seems to be the policy. But what it would result in is, at the end, if the pressure builds up, either the regime goes the kinetic way, starts attacking, what they were planning to attack in case of more attacks on the infrastructure. Or time goes by, nothing happens, and the election comes, and I don't know, maybe U.S. walks away. So basically, we are in a holding pattern before we go to one of the two eventual outcomes. It's either more kinetics hitting infrastructures in the Persian Gulf area, all the Arab countries, and probably the Iranian infrastructure, or we go the other path of just walking away, declaring a victory. Because I don't see any strategic ending to what's happening right now, because it would eventually end into one of the other two. And as I said, it only has the advantage of, as the pressure is built up slowly, the population would blame the regime and not the U.S. or Trump administration, which that's I think to be the logic behind what's happening. So we just have to wait and see. Thank you, Gary.
So that's very interesting because, the detractors of the president, they're waiting to January 20th, 2029. They're waiting it out. That's, by the way, I just looked it up, 880 days from now. I asked the computer to tell me because I can't figure it out. 880 days. Well, the Iranians can wait out 880 days, the regime, right? Iran? I mean, at least that's probably their thinking, right?
Well, I mean that's what they're thinking, but it's unpredictable. Once you put that kind of pressure on the population, something could happen. But this is more like a Hail Mary pass. It's like keeping your finger crossed and hoping for the best. But most probably one of the other two options will happen before that. But that's also always in the cards. There could be an uprising. There could be an overthrow of the regime, because as you increase the pressure, gradually it starts boiling. And as it starts boiling, it could go anyway, and that's certainly one of the options.
Thank you, Moran. Before I get to Soren, I just want to say, because we're getting close to the top of the hour, I just want to say that as I was listening to the various people come in and give their differing perspectives of this situation, I've got to tell you that some of the analysis here on our stage is a lot better than anything I've heard on cable television today with the so-called experts. So what makes this room a success are the people who participate by coming onto the stage. So I just wanted to thank you really from the bottom of my heart for that. Soren.
Hi, Gary. Look, one of the reasons that the Trump administration decided not to go ahead with attacking Iran's infrastructure was not because of making a case for Iranian to side with Iranian's government. Quite contrary, because Iranian's officials literally said publicly, not behind closed door, publicly to the press, that if U.S. decided to go after Iran's infrastructures, Iran's going to do the same thing to the allies, the U.S. allies, Gulf countries, particularly in the region. And they made a case for it. The Kuwaitis case, which Iran's went after, their infrastructures demonstrated Iran has got both the will and capability to go after infrastructures. And that would be Armageddon. That would be the end of the world. There would be literally no electricity in the entire region. So that is the reason why Trump administration decided not to go ahead with that, because of the potential Iran's retaliations.
Well, not only of potential Iranian retaliation, Soren, do you consider that they were concerned about the global reaction to an attack on the infrastructure? I mean, we would be the pariah that people are trying to make Israel out to be. It would be very difficult for the United States to maintain any moral high ground if they did that. I mean, look at the one mistake, which was a horrible mistake, and that was hitting the girls' school outside the military complex. That was a tremendous screw up, and it's the kind of thing that you don't recover from.
Absolutely. And the other thing is that it's about this particular round of sanctions, which obviously the secondary sanctions, not sanctions on Iran, it's sanctions on the entities, the countries that decide to have business with Iran. One can argue that it's not going to work. China officially says that they refuse to cooperate. We know that China is Iran's number one business allies in terms of buying their crude oil and etc. So if they say they're not going to be on board, what kind of mechanism the U.S. have to basically to enforce that? And also, last time I checked, Iran's got 15 countries as a neighbors countries. It's not only Turkmenistan, it's also Afghanistan, Pakistan, Turkey, Armenia, all of these Gulf countries around Iraq. So Iran can still do the business around, and they can survive. And for Iran, it's not a matter of succeeding. It's a matter of just being a matter of survival. That's what it is, and it's demonstrated given the fact that Iran's been through the tremendous sanctions since 1979 for almost 47 years. They know, as a government, how to basically manage the country based on the severe sanctions. Of course, the people's going to suffer, no doubt about it, but still, they demonstrated pretty much well in the past 47 years how to live under hefty sanctions, and all they have to do is just to wait for the administrations, for the November elections, and they inflict pain globally. And they've managed to do that so far. I mean, look at the global response to Trump administration. Literally everyone's on board. Well, believe it or not, with Iran, they see Iran as the victims. And by the way, it's not just Iran. You've got to see the bigger picture. Today, I think it was the U.S. Decided to put tariffs on the allies for Canada. They did the same thing with a couple of European countries. So Iran's, whether that was the intention of the policymakers, they put Iran in the same basket of the victims, countries around the world, and people resonate with Iran today. That was not the case 10 years ago, but thanks to this administration, is the case now. So Irans have to wait, and I'm confident that we'll have the capability to wait, still got the resources to wait. Of course, again, the inflation is quite high, the currency fluctuation, normal people are going to suffer. And Iranian government can get back to the Iranians and say, look, this is the same Trump that promised you guys they're going to bring you prosperity. That was the war that brought to us, and we know there was a lot of collateral damage. And also, this is the sanctions. This is what the Iranian officials regarded as economic terrorism, quote unquote. So it's much more harder to sell that. And we saw that there was a protest like 6 months ago, but now we don't see any kind of protest. Whether it's because of the government's managed to control, or is it because of the Iranians so they can't trust the administration? You have to wait to see which one is the case.
I suspect it's the latter. They were told to go out there and demonstrate. They died by the tens of thousands, and the administration pivoted. And you talk about erosion of trust in the global markets for the dollar, as we discussed earlier. Well, what about the erosion in the trust for the American government by the people of Iran? Now, I haven't been talking to people in Iran. I don't have a means of doing this. I wish I did, because in the past, during the Green Revolution, I did. But today it's more difficult. But I suspect that's the case. Adam, you got like 3 minutes.
I don't even need that. I just wanted to say the reason why Trump pulled back is because the American people hate the war. I don't know like precisely what most Trump voters were voting for, but they definitely weren't voting for another Middle Eastern war. And the fact that we have one has pissed a lot of people off. In fact, the majority of people off. And his polls are horrible because people do not want to be in a war that is clearly not one that's in their interest. We know it's not because the argument is not being made for it being in their interest. There's no argument being made today. There's no press releases from the government, like you don't see Trump in front of the bully pulpit trying to rally American support for the war based off of an idea that like is beneficial to them. When they discuss like people being attacked, it's all like people in bases, like obviously, and not people being attacked at home. It just is. This is Iraq 2.0 to the average American. They got high gas prices, which they were voting for Trump, to my mind, because of inflation. They weren't voting for him to keep it up. He said he was going to have deflation, and no new wars. And here we are in a new war, and there's just simply not going to be any selling this, which is why they're not even trying, which is why the Republicans are trying to talk about anything but the war. Because this is not like Iraq, where at least Iraq was popular in its outset with the American public. This was unpopular from day one. Venezuela was unpopular immediately. Even though Venezuela went as well as it could possibly have gone, it was still only polling at 30% popularity. Because this stuff is just like not in the interest of your average American. They're getting high gas prices. To their view, they're getting high gas prices for what?
So Adam, we're out of time, but I wanted to say, to your point, in The Art of War, Sun Tzu considers that the support of the people is the single most important foundation for victory. single most important, above military strengths, above logistics caused, by the war, whatever logistics there might be. You need the support of the people in order to win a war. And you're correct, the polling shows that the president does not have the support of the people. Folks, we're here Monday through Friday from 5 o'clock New York time. So at 5 o'clock New York time tomorrow for the next edition of the Critical Thinking Forum. Everybody be safe, be well, and peace out.